They scream. They panic. They run in circles. The world outside is loud, frantic, and unforgiving. Headlines flash like sirens. Notifications buzz like alarms. People argue, collapse, and claw for control. And in the middle of it all, you stand still. Or at least you try to. Because Stoicism teaches you something radical. That the chaos outside is not your enemy. Your real battle is within. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." And so you begin, not with resistance, but with reflection. You ask, what is truly in my control? And the answer is simple. Your thoughts, your choices, your values. Everything else, the noise, the opinions, the outcomes, is wind. And you are the mountain. You begin to observe the world like a Stoic, not with judgment, but with clarity. You see people reacting to every headline, every insult, every inconvenience. You see them tossed like leaves in a storm. And you realize, they are not free. They are not calm. They are not centered. They are ruled by externals. But you choose a different path. You wake up each morning and journal. What can I control today? What will I let go of? What virtue will I embody? You begin to build your inner fortress, not with walls, but with wisdom. You practice the dichotomy of control. You separate what is yours from what is not. You stop trying to fix everything. You stop trying to please everyone. You stop trying to predict the future. Instead, you focus on your posture, your tone, your intention. You become deliberate. You become disciplined. You become dignified. And the world notices. Not because you're loud, but because you're luminous. Not because you dominate, but because you don't flinch. Not because you win, but because you don't waver. You begin to walk through chaos like a monk in a marketplace. You hear the noise, but you don't absorb it. You see the panic, but you don't mirror it. You feel the pressure, but you don't collapse under it. Because you've trained your mind. You've practiced stillness. You've chosen virtue over volatility. And when people ask, "How are you so calm?" You don't preach, you embody. You don't lecture, you live. You don't explain, you express. You become the example. You become the anchor. You become the flame. And yes, there are days when the storm gets inside. When the anxiety creeps in. When the doubt whispers. When the fear tightens its grip. But you return to your practice. You breathe. You reflect. You realign. Because Stoicism is not perfection. It's persistence. It's not immunity. It's integrity. It's not detachment. It's discipline. You begin to see that calm is not a mood. It's a method. It's not a feeling. It's a philosophy. It's not a luxury. It's a lifestyle. And you choose it, again and again. You choose to respond, not react. You choose to reflect, not retaliate. You choose to rise, not run. Because the chaos outside will never stop. But the calm within can always begin. And so you walk forward, not with fear, but with focus. Not with panic, but with purpose. Not with noise, but with nobility. You are no longer the person who flinches. You are the person who flows. You are no longer the mirror. You are the mountain. You are no longer the reactor. You are the reason. And as the world spins, you remain still. Not because you're numb, but because you're noble. Not because you're passive, but because you're powerful. Not because you're detached, but because you're disciplined. You carry the Stoic truth. That peace is not found in silence, it's forged in storms. That strength is not loud. It's lucid. That calm is not weakness. It's wisdom. And you are calm, not because the world is quiet, but because your soul is. They tell you to stay positive, to visualize success, to manifest comfort. But Stoicism teaches something far more powerful. To visualize loss, to imagine failure, to rehearse pain not to suffer but to strengthen, because when you face what others fear, you become what others aren't, prepared. Epictetus said, "When you kiss your child, say to yourself, you may not return, not to be cruel but to be conscious, to love more deeply, to live more presently," and so you begin the practice of negative visualization. Not as pessimism but as preparation, as clarity, as courage. You imagine losing your job, your health, your reputation, and ask, who would I be without these things? And the answer whispers. Still you, still capable of virtue, still able to choose, still free to respond. You rehearse adversity, walk through imagined storms, sit with imagined grief, breathe through imagined chaos, and each time you grow stronger, more grounded, more grateful. You journal, what could go wrong today? How would I respond with virtue? What will I appreciate while I still have it? And slowly your soul shifts. You no longer cling, you connect. You no longer grasp, you give. You no longer panic, you prepare. You walk through life with open hands, love without attachment, plan without obsession, hope without dependency, because you've seen the fall and chosen to rise anyway. You understand suffering is not in the event but in the expectation, pain is not in the loss but in the illusion of permanence, fear is not in reality but in resistance to it, and so you stop resisting, start rehearsing, start reflecting, start refining. You become the person who is ready, not rigid, aware, not afraid, grateful, not greedy. You see beauty in fragility, meaning in mortality, strength in surrender. You walk with quiet confidence, speak with calm, act with clarity, not to control but to contribute. You are no longer the person who feared loss. You are the person who faced it. You are no longer the mirror. You are the flame. You are no longer the mask. You are the face. The Stoics teach that the wise live as if they've already lost everything and found peace anyway. And you live that way, love that way, lead that way. You carry the Stoic truth. That nothing lasts and that's why everything matters. That everything fades and that's why presence is power. That loss is inevitable and that's why gratitude is essential. Seneca said, "He robs present ills of their power who has rehearsed their coming." And you rehearse not to suffer but to strengthen, not to collapse but to clarify, not to dread but to deepen. You are free, not because nothing can be lost, but because you've already let go, strong, not because you're untouched, but because you're unshaken, calm, not because the world is gentle, but because your soul is grounded, ready, not for perfection, but for presence, alive, not in fantasy, but in full awareness, stoic, not because you don't feel, but because you feel with wisdom, and as you move forward, you carry no bitterness, no blame, no burden, only the lesson, the strength, the serenity, and the flame. They resist what happens. They curse what breaks. They mourn what could have been. But Stoicism teaches Amor, Fati, love your fate. Not just accept it, not just endure it, but embrace it, absorb it, become one with it. Because everything that happens, good or bad, is raw material for your growth, your virtue, your becoming. Marcus Aurelius said, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." And so you begin to see that pain is not punishment, it's path. That loss is not failure, it's formation. That betrayal is not the end, it's the edge of transformation. You stop asking, why me? And start asking, what now? You stop resisting life and start collaborating with it. You begin to see that fate is not your enemy, it's your sculptor. And every hardship is a chisel, every setback a stroke, every heartbreak a shaping force. You walk through fire not to burn, but to be forged. You stop wishing for ease and start wishing for strength. You stop praying for comfort and start praying for clarity. You begin to say, "Let it come. Let it shape me. Let it teach me." You love your fate, not because it's painless, but because it's purposeful. You love your fate, not because it's perfect, but because it's precise. You love your fate, not because it's gentle, but because it's just. And as you move forward, you carry no resentment, no regret, no resistance. You carry only the lesson, the light, the liberation. You are no longer the victim of fate. You are its student, its partner, its embodiment. You are no longer the mirror. You are the flame. You are no longer the mask. You are the face. You are Amor Fati, not in theory, but in truth. You begin to see that everything that happens is a gift, sometimes wrapped in pain, sometimes disguised as loss, sometimes hidden in chaos. But always a gift of insight, a gift of strength, a gift of transformation. You begin to live with open hands, not to surrender, but to receive. You begin to walk with open eyes, not to fear, but to face. You begin to breathe with open lungs, not to brace, but to become. You are no longer the person who resists. You are the person who receives. You are no longer the person who drowns. You are the person who dives. You are no longer the person who breaks. You are the person who bends. And in that bending, you become unbreakable. In that surrender, you become sovereign. In that acceptance, you become aligned. You begin to see that Amor Fati is not weakness, it's wisdom. It's not passivity, it's power. It's not defeat, it's depth. You begin to live each day with the question, what is fate teaching me today? And the answers come, not in thunder, but in whispers. In the missed train. In the broken phone. In the harsh words. In the silence. In the delay. In the detour. In the discomfort. You begin to see that fate is always speaking, if you're willing to listen. That life is always sculpting, if you're willing to be shaped. That pain is always pointing, if you're willing to follow. And so you follow, not blindly but bravely. You follow, not with fear, but with faith. You follow, not with resistance, but with reverence. You begin to see that Amor Fati is not just a philosophy, it's a posture, a way of standing, a way of seeing, a way of surrendering. You begin to walk through life with quiet strength, not loud, but luminous. You begin to speak with calm, not to control, but to contribute. You begin to act with clarity, not to dominate, but to dance. You are no longer the person who fought fate. You are the person who flowed with it. You are no longer the person who cursed the storm. You are the person who became the sky. You are no longer the person who feared the fire. You are the person who became the flame. And as you move forward, you carry no bitterness, no blame, no burden. You carry only the lesson, the strength, the serenity. You carry the Stoic truth, that fate is not your enemy, it's your evolution. That hardship is not your punishment, it's your path. That pain is not your prison, it's your portal. You carry the wisdom of Epictetus, who said, "Do not seek for things to happen as you wish, but wish for things to happen as they do, and your life will flow well." And your life begins to flow, not because it's easy, but because it's aligned. Not because it's painless, but because it's purposeful. Not because it's perfect, but because it's present. You begin to live with grace, not because you're untouched, but because you're unshaken. You begin to love with depth, not because you're unscarred, but because you're unafraid. You begin to lead with light, not because you're untested, but because you're unwavering. You are Amor Fati, not as a quote, but as a quality. Not as a phrase, but as a flame. Not as a concept, but as a compass. And as you walk forward, you walk with open arms, not to grasp, but to give. You walk with open heart, not to be filled, but to be free. You walk with open soul, not to be seen, but to be sincere. You are no longer the person who resisted fate. You are the person who radiates it. You are no longer the person who feared the fall. You are the person who flies through it. You are no longer the person who begged for control. You are the person who built character. And in that character you find peace. In that peace you find power. In that power you find purpose. You are Amor Fati, not because life is gentle, but because you are grounded. Not because fate is kind, but because you are clear. Not because the world is soft, but because your soul is strong. And you carry that strength, not in your fists, but in your footsteps. Not in your voice, but in your virtue. Not in your armor, but in your awareness. You are the flame. You are the force. You are the fate, loved, lived, and luminous. They see disaster. They see betrayal. They see failure. And they panic. They spiral. They collapse. But Stoicism teaches you that the event is never the enemy. It's your interpretation that wounds you. That pain is not in the moment. It's in the meaning you assign to it. That suffering is not in reality. It's in your perspective. Marcus Aurelius said, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment." And so you begin to train your mind, not to avoid hardship, but to reframe it. You begin to ask, what else could this mean? What else could this teach me? What else could this become? And the answers begin to shift your soul. You see the breakup not as rejection, but as redirection. You see the failure not as defeat, but as data. You see the delay not as punishment, but as preparation. You begin to understand that perspective is not passive, it's power. That how you see determines how you suffer. That how you interpret determines how you endure. You begin to walk through life with a new lens, not rose-colored, but reason-colored. You stop asking, why is this happening to me? And start asking, what is this revealing in me? You stop reacting and start reflecting. You stop blaming and start building. You begin to see that every challenge is a mirror, not of your weakness, but of your wisdom. That every setback is a signal, not of your failure, but of your formation. That every insult is an invitation, not to fight, but to fortify. You begin to journal each day. What did I misinterpret today? What story did I tell myself? What truth did I forget? And slowly, your soul begins to shift. You no longer see chaos. You see character. You no longer see pain. You see purpose. You no longer see loss. You see liberation. You begin to walk through storms with serenity, not because they're gentle, but because your gaze is grounded. You begin to speak with calm, not because the world is kind, but because your mind is clear. You begin to act with dignity, not because life is easy, but because your lens is elevated. You are no longer the person who flinched. You are the person who framed. You are no longer the mirror. You are the flame. You are no longer the mask. You are the face. The Stoics teach that the wise person sees everything as training. That adversity is not a threat. It's a teacher. That hardship is not a curse. It's a curriculum. And you begin to learn, not with fear, but with focus. You begin to grow, not with panic, but with perspective. You begin to rise, not with resistance, but with reframing. You begin to see that the power of perspective is not in denial, it's in depth. Not in fantasy, but in framing. Not in escape, but in elevation. You begin to live each day with the question, what story am I telling myself? And you rewrite that story, not to deceive, but to deepen. You rewrite that story, not to avoid, but to awaken. You rewrite that story, not to numb, but to nourish. You begin to see that your mind is a lens, and you choose what it magnifies. You choose what it filters. You choose what it focuses on. And you choose to focus on virtue, on clarity, on courage. You begin to see that perspective is not just a tool, it's a torch. And you carry that torch through darkness, through doubt, through despair. You begin to illuminate your path, not with certainty, but with serenity. You begin to guide others, not with answers, but with awareness. You begin to lead, not with control, but with clarity. You are no longer the person who was blinded. You are the person who sees. You are no longer the person who was trapped. You are the person who transforms. You are no longer the person who was reactive. You are the person who reframes. And as you move forward, you carry no bitterness, no blame, no burden. You carry only the lesson, the strength, the serenity. You carry the Stoic truth, that your perspective is your power, that your framing is your freedom, that your lens is your liberation. You carry the wisdom of Epictetus, who said, "Men are disturbed not by things, but by the views which they take of them." And you take a new view, not to escape, but to evolve, not to deny, but to deepen, not to pretend, but to perceive. You begin to live with clarity, not because life is perfect, but because your perception is purified. You begin to love with depth, not because people are flawless, but because your lens is forgiving. You begin to lead with light, not because the world is easy, but because your gaze is elevated. You are perspective, not as a concept, but as a compass, not as a theory, but as a torch, not as a phrase, but as a flame. And as you walk forward, you walk with open eyes, not to judge, but to journey. You walk with open heart, not to grasp, but to grow. You walk with open soul, not to control, but to contribute. You are no longer the person who feared the fall. You are the person who framed it. You are no longer the person who cursed the chaos. You are the person who clarified it. You are no longer the person who begged for certainty. You are the person who built serenity. And in that serenity, you find strength. In that strength, you find sight. In that sight, you find self. You are the flame. You are the lens. You are the light. They say you've changed. They say you've grown cold. They say you don't care anymore. But Stoicism teaches that emotional detachment is not apathy. It's alignment. That pulling back is not rejection. It's refinement. That silence is not cruelty. It's clarity. You begin to understand that feeling everything is not strength. It's surrender. That absorbing everyone's chaos is not compassion. It's collapse. That reacting to every emotion is not connection. It's confusion. Marcus Aurelius said, "You can commit injustice by doing nothing." And so you begin to act, not with impulse, but with intention. You begin to feel, not with chaos, but with clarity. You begin to love, not with attachment, but with awareness. You stop absorbing their moods. You stop chasing their validation. You stop drowning in their drama. You begin to build boundaries, not to isolate, but to illuminate. You begin to protect your peace, not to punish, but to preserve. You begin to choose your energy, not to escape, but to evolve. You journal each day. Where did I lose myself in someone else's storm? What did I feel that wasn't mine? What will I release tomorrow? And slowly, your soul begins to breathe. You no longer carry their pain. You witness it. You no longer fix their chaos. You observe it. You no longer mirror their moods. You master your own. You begin to walk through life with quiet strength, not loud, but luminous. You begin to speak with calm, not to control, but to clarify. You begin to act with dignity, not to dominate, but to detach. You are no longer the person who absorbed everything. You are the person who aligned with truth. You are no longer the mirror. You are the flame. You are no longer the mask. You are the face. The Stoics teach that detachment is not indifference, it's independence. That emotional discipline is not numbness, it's nobility. That serenity is not distance, it's depth. You begin to see that emotional detachment is not a wall, it's a window. A window into your values. A window into your clarity. A window into your strength. You begin to feel deeply, but choose wisely. You begin to love fully, but release freely. You begin to care sincerely, but protect fiercely. You are kind, not for approval, but for peace. You are honest, not for applause, but for alignment. You are strong, not for attention, but for authenticity. And as you move forward, you carry no bitterness, no blame, no burden. You carry only the lesson, the strength, the serenity. You carry the Stoic truth, that emotional detachment is not the absence of feeling, it's the presence of focus. That compassion without boundaries is chaos. That love without clarity is loss. You carry the wisdom of Epictetus, who said, "Freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control." And you begin to disregard, not with arrogance, but with awareness. You begin to release, not with resentment, but with reverence. You begin to detach, not with coldness, but with courage. You are no longer the person who drowned in emotion. You are the person who sailed through it. You are no longer the person who collapsed under pressure. You are the person who rose with purpose. You are no longer the person who begged for peace. You are the person who built it. And in that peace you find power. In that power you find presence. In that presence you find perspective. You begin to live with grace, not because you're untouched, but because you're unshaken. You begin to love with depth, not because you're unscarred, but because you're unafraid. You begin to lead with light, not because you're untested, but because you're unwavering. You are emotional detachment, not as a defense, but as a discipline. Not as a reaction, but as a refinement. Not as a shield, but as a sanctuary. And as you walk forward, you walk with open eyes. Not to absorb, but to align. You walk with open heart, not to collapse, but to contribute. You walk with open soul, not to please, but to preserve. You are no longer the person who feared being misunderstood. You are the person who mastered being misread. You are no longer the person who explained your silence. You are the person who embodied it. You are no longer the person who chased connection. You are the person who created clarity. And in that clarity you find calm. In that calm you find courage. In that courage you find character. You are the flame. You are the focus. You are the freedom. They rush. They react. They run from silence as if it were a threat. But Stoicism teaches that stillness is not weakness, it's wisdom. That silence is not emptiness, it's elevation. That calm is not passivity, it's power. You begin to understand that in a world addicted to noise, stillness is rebellion. That in a culture obsessed with speed, slowing down is strength. That in a society built on reaction, reflection is revolution. Marcus Aurelius said, "Nowhere you can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions, than your own soul." And so you begin to enter that space, not with fear, but with reverence. You begin to sit with yourself, not to escape, but to engage. You begin to breathe, not to perform, but to purify. You begin to listen, not to others, but to your own clarity. You stop chasing stimulation. You stop clinging to distraction. You stop fearing solitude. You begin to see that stillness is not the absence of movement. It's the presence of meaning. That silence is not the absence of sound. It's the presence of soul. That calm is not the absence of conflict. It's the presence of control. You journal each day. Where did I rush today? What did I avoid in silence? What truth did I hear when I slowed down? And slowly, your soul begins to settle. You no longer react. You respond. You no longer panic. You pause. You no longer chase. You choose. You begin to walk through life with quiet strength, not loud, but luminous. You begin to speak with calm, not to impress, but to express. You begin to act with clarity, not to dominate, but to deepen. You are no longer the person who feared stillness. You are the person who found strength in it. You are no longer the mirror. You are the flame. You are no longer the mask. You are the face. The Stoics teach that the wise person is unmoved by chaos, not because they are numb, but because they are anchored. Anchored in reason. Anchored in virtue. Anchored in truth. You begin to see that stillness is not stagnation, it's strategy. That silence is not avoidance, it's awareness. That calm is not weakness, it's wisdom. You begin to live each day with the question, what does my soul need to hear today? And the answers come, not in thunder, but in whispers. In the breath. In the pause. In the space between thoughts. You begin to honor that space, not as emptiness, but as essence. You begin to protect that space, not as isolation, but as illumination. You begin to expand that space, not as distance, but as depth. You are kind, not for applause, but for peace. You are honest, not for admiration, but for alignment. You are strong, not for attention, but for authenticity. And as you move forward, you carry no bitterness, no blame, no burden. You carry only the lesson, the strength, the serenity. You carry the Stoic truth, that stillness is not a luxury, it's a necessity. That silence is not a void, it's a vessel. That calm is not a pause, it's a practice. You carry the wisdom of Seneca, who said, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." And you begin to quiet that imagination, not to suppress, but to simplify. You begin to calm that chaos, not to numb, but to nourish. You begin to still that storm, not to escape, but to embody. You are no longer the person who feared silence. You are the person who found self in it. You are no longer the person who filled every moment. You are the person who felt every breath. You are no longer the person who chased every answer. You are the person who cherished every question. And in that questioning, you find clarity. In that clarity, you find courage. In that courage, you find character. You begin to live with grace, not because you're untouched, but because you're unshaken. You begin to love with depth, not because you're unscarred, but because you're unafraid. You begin to lead with light, not because you're untested, but because you're unwavering. You are stillness, not as a mood, but as a method. Not as a state, but as a stance. Not as a feeling, but as a flame. And as you walk forward, you walk with open eyes, not to rush, but to reflect. You walk with open heart, not to grasp, but to grow. You walk with open soul, not to perform, but to purify. You are no longer the person who feared the pause. You are the person who found power in it. You are no longer the person who filled the silence. You are the person who felt the truth in it. You are no longer the person who ran from reflection. You are the person who rose through it. And in that rising, you find peace. In that peace, you find purpose. In that purpose, you find presence. You are the flame. You are the focus. You are the freedom. They lie. They cheat. They shout. They betray. And the world watches, applauds, imitates. The brokenness spreads like wildfire, through headlines, through homes, through hearts. But Stoicism teaches you that virtue is not a reaction to the world. It's a rebellion against it. That goodness is not weakness, it's strength. That integrity is not naivety, it's nobility. Marcus Aurelius said, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." And so you begin, not with rage, but with resolve. You begin to live by principle, not popularity. You begin to speak with truth, not tactics. You begin to act with dignity, not desperation. You stop asking, "Why is the world like this?" and start asking, "How will I respond?" You stop waiting for others to change and start becoming the change. You begin to see that virtue is not a costume, it's a compass. That character is not a performance, it's a practice. That morality is not a mood, it's a method. You journal each day. Where did I compromise today? What did I tolerate that betrayed my values? What will I protect tomorrow? And slowly, your soul begins to strengthen. You no longer mirror the madness. You master your mind. You no longer echo the noise. You embody the truth. You no longer chase approval. You choose alignment. You begin to walk through the world with quiet strength, not loud, but luminous. You begin to speak with calm, not to win, but to witness. You begin to act with clarity, not to impress, but to inspire. You are no longer the person who flinched. You are the person who forged. You are no longer the mirror. You are the flame. You are no longer the mask. You are the face. The Stoics teach that the wise person lives by reason, not reaction. That virtue is the only good, and vice the only evil. That the world may be broken, but your soul can remain whole. You begin to see that living with virtue is not easy, it's essential. That being good is not convenient, it's courageous. That choosing integrity is not popular, it's powerful. You begin to live each day with the question, what kind of person am I becoming? And the answers come, not in thunder, but in whispers. In the way you speak, in the way you walk, in the way you treat those who cannot help you. You begin to live with grace, not because the world is gentle, but because your soul is grounded. You begin to love with depth, not because people are flawless, but because your heart is free. You begin to lead with light, not because the path is clear, but because your purpose is. You are kind, not for applause, but for peace. You are honest, not for admiration, but for alignment. You are strong, not for attention, but for authenticity. And as you move forward, you carry no bitterness, no blame, no burden. You carry only the lesson, the strength, the serenity. You carry the Stoic truth. That virtue is not a reaction, it's a revolution. That goodness is not weakness, it's wisdom. That integrity is not fragile, it's fire. You carry the wisdom of Epictetus, who said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." And you begin to do, not with fear but with focus. You begin to build, not with ego but with essence. You begin to become, not with noise, but with nobility. You are no longer the person who waited for the world to change. You are the person who changed within it. You are no longer the person who begged for justice. You are the person who embodied it. You are no longer the person who feared corruption. You are the person who forged character. And in that character you find peace. In that peace you find power. In that power you find purpose. You begin to live with clarity, not because the world is clean, but because your conscience is. You begin to love with courage, not because people are perfect, but because your heart is. You begin to lead with light, not because the system is fair, but because your soul is fierce. You are virtue, not as a word, but as a way. Not as a theory, but as a torch. Not as a concept, but as a compass. And as you walk forward, you walk with open eyes. Not to judge, but to journey. You walk with open heart. Not to grasp, but to grow. You walk with open soul. Not to perform, but to purify. You are no longer the person who feared the fall. You are the person who rose through it. You are no longer the person who cursed the chaos. You are the person who clarified it. You are no longer the person who begged for peace. You are the person who built it. And in that building you find strength. In that strength you find sight. In that sight you find self. You are the flame. You are the focus. You are the freedom.